my friends, and welcome to Crimes with Cole. So, hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you all have had a great weekend. So, in today's case, we are going to be talking about Belinda Temple. And if you have not heard of this case, it is shocking. It has had me on the edge of my chair through the entire thing. It is just crazy. You'll see what I mean. Let's just get into it. Belinda Temple was born as Belinda Tracy Lucas. She was born on December 30th, 1968. She was born to her mother and father, Tom and Carol, and has a twin sister named Brenda and three brothers named Brent, Brian, and Barry. She was raised in Texas, where she had attended Stephen F. Austin University. She had taught aerobics all during college, and while she was there, she had met David, who was a football player. David had proposed on the 50-yard line there at the university, and Belinda said yes. The two married in 1992. Once the two college sweethearts graduated, Belinda packed her bags and moved to Cathy, Texas, about 170 miles from her childhood home. But it's where David was originally from. This is where the two would start their lives. The two ended up both becoming high school teachers, but taught at different high schools. Belinda taught at Cathy High School as a special education teacher, and David taught at Hastings High School, where he was also a football coach. Now, many people describe the couple as compatible with a loving relationship. They were just good for one another and meant to be. Overall, a very healthy relationship. The two had a little boy named Evan in 1996, and both Belinda and David were said to be amazing parents. And life seemed to be great for the Temple family. Belinda ended up getting pregnant again a few years later with a little girl and was due in February of 1999. Except Belinda nor David would ever get to meet their little girl, who was due to be named Erin Ashley Temple. Leading up to the devastating day in January, friends and family of the couple would come on to testify that David would make rude, belittling remarks to Belinda and about her behind her back. He would make comments about her weight, even though she was entering her third trimester of pregnancy, and comments about her appearance. And I think any of us that have been pregnant, especially multiple pregnancies, know that not every pregnancy is the same. And while some feel beautiful and energized and you look amazing every day right before birth, others don't. And they're just always tired, and they're trying to finish out their pregnancy. And that was the case for Belinda. This second pregnancy was really rough on her physically. So her looking like a desperate housewife was not the first thing on her priority list. Her feet were swollen a lot of the time, and she was just exhausted all the time. Friends would also go on to say that David had a controlling side to him that only a few saw. And while Belinda was a strong-willed woman, there was just something about David that turned her submissive whenever he was around. It was really strange. Now, let's back up to the summer of 1998. So that summer before Belinda's tragic death. David went to his high school reunion, and I am sure you know where this is about to go. David ran into an old ex-girlfriend while at the reunion, and while Belinda did not go with David on the first night because he didn't want her to, she did go to the reunion on the second night because her friend told her she needed to go. And while she was not there that first night, this is when David took it upon himself to catch up with his ex, physically and verbally. Fast forward to January of 1999, specifically January 11th of 1999, Belinda got a phone call from the daycare stating that little Evan was running a fever. So Belinda left work to go pick up her son and returned home. Now, around 12:30 or so, David came home from work to keep Evan because Belinda had to go back to work. She had a meeting that day that lasted until 3:30 or so. So she went back to work to attend the meeting. Now, after work, after the meeting, she stopped off at her in-laws' house to pick up some homemade soup. And when Belinda got back home around 4 p.m., David decided, since little Evan was feeling better, that they were going to go up to the park so that the extremely exhausted Belinda, remember she's 8 months pregnant, could take a nap and get some rest in a quiet house. Sounds peaceful. So David and Evan loaded up in the Chevy pickup and headed to the park. Now they drove up the street to the neighborhood park. And then they decided that they were going to go to the bigger park that was a couple blocks down the road. They had time to kill anyway, so why not? Little Evan decided he wanted to get a drink. He was thirsty. So David stopped off at the store and they went in to get little Evan a drink. Surveillance would confirm this, and so would David's receipt. That David and Evan entered the store at 4:32 p.m. and they exited the store at 4:38 p.m. The store is 12 minutes from their house. Now, with some drinks in their hands, they are ready to head to the bigger park, but David decided they weren't going to go to the park now. That they were going to swing by the Home Depot to go check out some shelving for the nursery before getting back home in time for supper. They went into the Home Depot and they were seen on video at 5:14, but they were never seen on video leaving the store. Now, Belinda's twin sister, Brenda, had called her sister at 4:38 p.m. There was no answer. Kenneth, David's father, was calling to check on Evan at 5:30 p.m. But there was no answer. And then David's mother also called Belinda at 5:40 p.m. And there was also no answer. So, David said he and Evan came back home around 5:30 p.m. And the Home Depot is about 12 minutes away. So David pulls into the driveway, opens up the garage door, and pulls the truck in. He told Evan he would watch him ride his bike, but he wanted to let Mom know that they were home. This is when David approached the back door to haul her in, but he saw with the lower portion of the door where the glass is, the window part, was broken in, like somebody had broken into the house. He turned around, grabbed little Evan and ran across the street to the neighbor's house, Mike and Peggy. Now, David handed Evan off to Mike, asked him to call 911. It had looked like someone broken into his house. Mike handed Evan off to Peggy and said, call 911. So Peggy rang 911 at 5:36 p.m. While Peggy rang 911, David is running across the street, opens the gate to his backyard. Mike is hollering for David to slow down, but nothing is stopping David at this point. David runs inside the house, slamming the back door behind him. He rushes to find his wife. Mike is approaching the gate to the backyard, but does not enter because of the family's dog. The dog was in the backyard, barking somewhat aggressively, like jumping up on the fence, like growling, so Mike hollered from the street up to David if he was okay, like what's happening. Peggy comes across the street with her cordless phone. Oh, those. And is trying to call David's cell phone to see if he's okay because Mike's not getting any response and to see what's happening. While she's calling David, Mike walked around the house to see if maybe there was some other way someone got in besides the back door, to see if anything else had been tampered with. And after David ran into the house, he made his way to the master bedroom, where he found Belinda curled up in a ball in the corner of the closet. He grabbed her feet and pulled her flat, and he rang 911 at 5:38 p.m. When police arrived, they knew that someone had been shot and they may be dealing with a burglar. So they had to figure out how to get this aggressive dog out of the way so they could enter the home. They needed to enter the home. They needed to see the back door. At this time, David comes walking out of the back door and calmly tells the police, "My wife has been shot and is dead." The officers asked David to remove the dog from the backyard so that they could enter the home. So the dog was put into the garage and the police entered the home. And as David stood there outside of his house on January 11th, he was just quiet and calm as he could be. Certainly not the emotions most of us would have after finding our 8-month pregnant wife in the condition that he just found his. And while more officers and investigators and medical personnel arrived to David's house, they placed David in the back of the patrol car, as it's routine in this situation, to get optimal answers and details from every witness so that witnesses don't start mixing up their own versions of things. And the longer David sat in the patrol car, the more aggravated he had become. Belinda was killed by gunshot wound to the head. And based upon the medical examiner's findings, the gunshot barrel was in contact with Belinda's head while it was fired. And they couldn't give an exact time of death based on all their techniques that they used to find out the time of death. They were all giving different time frames of when Belinda's life was ended. David swore this was a break-in, but the police noticed that Belinda's purse was still sitting on the counter with her keys in the tray right next to it. Her jewelry was still on her, and upstairs unworn jewelry was still where it usually was placed. All valuables were still in their designated place within the Temple home. So they started asking all the neighbors, and none of the neighbors noticed or heard anything. They didn't hear the dog barking or going crazy like the dog would have had somebody broken into the house. And they didn't see anybody snooping around their house, and they certainly didn't hear any shotgun shots, except for the neighbor boys that lived directly behind David. They did hear a big boom sound that would resemble a shotgun, and they heard this sound around 4:23 p.m. But remember that they went to the store, and they have it on camera. David and Evan entering the store at 4:32 p.m. and the store is 12 minutes away. And no one else heard or seen anything at that time while they were out walking their dogs or going to their mailboxes or driving past their house. David was questioned for 3.5 hours and became very agitated during the questioning process. He never once cried. He was just shaking and bouncing, and he never made eye contact with the investigators. And while we all want to point fingers, we have to remember that everybody deals with stressful situations like this differently. So while you and I may be having a mental breakdown because we just found our spouse lifeless, other people hide and suppress those emotions, masking them with anger. Now, David's dirty little secret, named Heather Scott, was later brought to the surface as the police kept digging to find who Belinda's killer was. And they discovered that Heather Scott was a teacher at the same school that David taught and coached at. In the fall of 1998, a group of teachers would get together and go out on occasion, have a few drinks during happy hour, things that coworkers and other work environments do too. Nothing out of the norm, except Heather started flirting with two of her coworkers, David and David's friend Quentin. And while Heather knew both men were married, she still proceeded to be flirtatious with the two men, hanging out with them privately and even going as far as kissing them. David fell into this trap and soon was playing the part of someone who wanted a relationship with this woman. He was buying her gifts, sending her cute messages, not hiding the fact that he's having an affair on his wife. It wasn't long before the two had engaged in a full-on sexual relationship with one another, where both started growing feelings towards the other one. This affair came out after Belinda's funeral. David came clean about the affair and laid low. But on Valentine's Day, a little over a month after his wife's passing, David had sent Heather flowers. And by March, the two were in a relationship again. They got engaged in January of 2001. That's 2 years after Belinda's death. And married on June 9th of 2001. His attorney advised him not to do that. David said the hell with it and did it anyways. David's friend Quentin had lunch with David a few times after Belinda's death and asked David why he won't just talk to the police and clear his name, but David refused. He said his attorney told him to not speak with the police unless he was present. And oddly enough, Quentin found himself being followed by David on a few occasions after David discovered that Quentin had testified. David would just tell Quentin to keep his mouth shut anytime he came in contact with him. The police were on a hunt for this 12-gauge shotgun that was used because David didn't own a shotgun. He had owned a 20 gauge shotgun when he was younger, but once he went away to college, he got rid of it and hadn't owned a gun since. So, who had this shotgun that was used? The police had tested every shotgun they came in contact with that had been linked back to David. They had searched and could not find any matches. The police did look into Belinda's neighbor, Riley Joe Sanders III, a student at Cathy High School, the high school that Belinda had worked at. And Belinda had came over and spoke to Riley's parents about him and his friends leaving beer bottles on her front porch and messing up some of her Christmas decorations. But the police didn't look too far into the Sanders kid because, he had a legit alibi for the day of Belinda's murder. He was just a rotten kid. But he did have a legit alibi. The police kept looking back at David. And on November 30th, 2004, 7 years after Belinda's death, David was arrested for the murder of his wife. But ironically, this was just weeks after Scott Peterson had been arrested for the murder of his pregnant wife. So, did David really do it? Could David have shot his wife with a shotgun that is nowhere to be found and still make it to the supermarket to buy Evan a drink at 4:32 p.m. that is 12 minutes from his house? So he would have to leave his house at 4:20. Belinda did get home at 4 p.m., but no one except those little boys that lived behind them heard a big boom sound. And remember, those little boys heard that sound at 4:23 p.m. So the timeline just isn't lining up for me. So are they convicting David based on his poor morals and lack of emotions? Or did David truly have a motive to get rid of Belinda? I don't know. You'll have to let me know. After a 4-week trial, the jury found David guilty, but in 2012, a new detective started questioning if David had truly been the one to kill his wife. He started searching through all the old evidence and discovered that the broken glass by the door that many of the previous detectives felt was staged was in the same pattern of broken glass from a legitimate break-in 9 days prior to Belinda's murder. The burglars were Riley Joe Sanders III, the neighbor boy. They were his friends, but Riley was not partaking in that activity that night. As the new investigator kept digging at all the evidence, he discovered that the 1,319-page police report was withheld from David's attorney during the trial. And this report pertained a lot of beneficial information and evidence favorable to David. In 2015, David's new attorney asked that David's conviction be overturned. The judge agreed that there were 36 pieces of evidence that should have been turned over to David's attorney and was not during the trial. However, it wasn't up to the judge to overturn this conviction. It was up to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And in November of 2016, David's conviction was overturned. And he was released from prison on December 28th, 2016. Way to really rub it in his face by making him spend Christmas in prison. But David's happy life of a free man was short-lived because in August of 2019, David was retried for the murder of his wife. They told the new jury the details of what happened that day and how they felt the break-in was staged, that nothing was missing, and the family dog didn't seem to deter any strangers from entering the home, like he did with their neighbor Mike. And the jury found David guilty again, and he now faces life in prison. But the jury could not decide on a punishment, so the court set a new hearing for that in March of 2020. However, due to the virus, the world slowed down and things got pushed back and put on hold, as most of us know. So David is currently in jail on $1 million bond, from my understanding, waiting for sentencing, which was scheduled for January 2021, but Harris County seems to have a long list of cases to be seen, and from my understanding, it's a very clogged up system, so it just takes a while to get through everything. But how crazy is that case? And I also want to say that little Evan was 3, almost 4, when his mom passed. So when his dad was arrested for the first time, he was like 9 years old. And then his dad went to prison until he was almost 21 years old. And then he was out for a few years and then was sent back to jail awaiting prison. And, you know, that poor little boy, as if his mom being ripped out of his life at such a young age wasn't horrible enough, he then, you know, losing his dad for all those preteen and teenage years. And I know there's a lot of kids out there that go through life without parents around, but this could have been prevented on all levels. David could have just ran off with Heather if he was that miserable with the life he had created for himself with Belinda. I don't know, guys. Do you think he did it? I'm just so confused on where in the world this man got the confidence to fire a shotgun in his house that had neighbors very close that are actively outside thinking they wouldn't hear it. The timing just seems like it would be cutting it super close. He would have had to really pre-plan all of this, and I just don't know if he did. I feel the Scott Peterson trial situation that was happening during David's first trial held a significant amount of influence over the jury without them really realizing it. But what do you guys think? Let me know. And until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then.